Hello there and welcome back to the TF1 Show. It's so nice to be here and relieve the unbearable tension that must have built up after the crazy fallout from last week's Canadian Grand Prix. But before we get to that, my name is Tinus Ferreira, your host, advisor, confidant and ATM that can be used to pay off the crippling debt that is the world of Formula One. So today's episode is the third of a three-part series discussing the most dominant teams in recent memory. For those who didn't catch the previous two episodes, we discussed Ferrari and the Schumacher era in part 1 and then Red Bull and Sebastian Vettel in part 2. Go check those out if you haven't yet done so. So today we discuss the current dominating force in F1 and perhaps the most dominant ever, Mercedes. So as per previous episodes, we will have a look at how they got to this position, what they've been able to achieve, and lastly, whether we will see them crippled in the near future. So just a quick summary, Mercedes has been, the dominant team from 2014 up until now. They have won 5 drivers' championships in total, with Lewis Hamilton winning in 2014, 15, 17, and 18, and Nico Rosberg winning the championship in 2016. They have also, over the same period, won 5 Constructors' Championships and therefore have won 5 Drivers' and Constructors' Double Championships between 2014 and 2018. And I think the most incredible stat out of all of this is that they've won a total of 75% of the total races over this period, which is a remarkable amount if you think about the competition at the top level of the sport. Cool. So, quick overview of how Mercedes was able to get to this incredibly dominant position. It all starts with a man called Ross Brawn. Now, if you've heard this name before, you're not hallucinating. It's basically the same guy who was instrumental in getting Ferrari to the top with Michael Schumacher in the late 90s and the early 2000s. But, obviously Ross has now decided to seek greener pastures. But in any case, so he was quite successful with a private team called Brawn that they won the championship with Jenson Button in 2009. And after that very successful season, Mercedes brought the team for 2010 with 2 shiny new drivers in Nico Rosberg and Michael Schumacher, who was making a comeback after retiring at the end of 2006. So they had quite average results between 2010 and 2013, but with Ross Brawn and later Paddy Lowe joining forces with Niki Lauda to build, towards a massive regulation change coming up in 2014, people were all thinking that, there might be something big coming with this Mercedes team. And, it turned out to be. And the final, sort of link in this golden chain of success was Lauda finally convincing Lewis Hamilton to move from McLaren at the end of 2012 to Mercedes in 2013, where Hamilton joined Rosberg after Schumacher retired for the final time. So I guess before we get to the next sort of section, we can again draw parallels between what's happened here with Mercedes and what we saw in the previous episode with Red Bull and with Ferrari, where it was sort of a one-man building a very, very solid team around him and organizing the team in such a way as to be prepared for, some changes coming in the future. And I think none of these teams were ever sort of impatient in terms of they want immediate results, and they realized that it was something they're going to have to build towards and to make sure that they have the structures in place to, when the opportunity presents itself, take advantage and to be ready and to then enjoy massive success. And I think, since this is the third team we're discussing, that's definitely a golden thread we can pull through all of these different tales of domination from the different teams. Okay, so let's talk about, what Mercedes has done over the past 5 years. And in 2014, it was just proper domination. And I think the key thing here as well is the never before seen collaboration between, the aero and the chassis department, so the people that actually build the car and design the car, and the engine department in-house that Mercedes has as well, with special mention to the head of the Mercedes engine department, Andy Cowell, where they were so incredibly prepared for the massive changes that was coming in 2014, where probably the majority and the main area of change was related to the engine, which was a new 1.6 liter V6 with a turbo and massively complicated energy recovery systems and energy deployment systems, where they recovered energy from the brakes and they recovered energy from the heat that the engine itself generated, and all of this can be channeled back to be used to charge the battery that can then be deployed again in the engine to provide additional power. And just the absolute complexity of these power units, Mercedes seemed to be the only team that understood the amount of development work and the amount of preparation that had to be made before actually being able to run this engine and test this engine. So in a few years prior to the actual 2014 start date of these new cars, Mercedes has been frantically developing their engine in conjunction with the development that they were doing on the actual chassis of the car, and were just so prepared in terms of integrating this new engine and the complexity of this new engine into the whole car and into the whole bodywork, that when they arrived at the beginning of 2014, everybody else were caught napping, especially Renault and Ferrari, who were the other two teams that were building engines at that stage. And I think they were so far behind what Mercedes was able to produce in terms of a total package that, the whole 2014 championship was just Lewis Hamilton against Nico Rosberg. It was a Mercedes 1-2 fest all the way through. The only thing that ever stopped Mercedes winning the race was if there were any reliability issues. And it's, then obviously clear that Hamilton won the championship in the final race, and Mercedes won 16 out of the 19 races in total, with Red Bull winning the other 3, mainly due to, either strategy error or reliability issues from Mercedes' perspective, because they were just by far and away the fastest team during that year, all because they were so well prepared and so well synchronized. They were just such a well-oiled machine, and all of the other teams were having so much difficulty with the engines. Specifically, they were so far down on power, the engines weren't reliable, and these Mercedes engines were just incredible. So they stole a proper march on everybody else that year. Now in 2015, it was more of the same. The other engine manufacturers were lagging behind, and Mercedes, they were just getting better. Ferrari sneaked a race here and there, but Mercedes won 16 out of the 19 races again. So once more, just what domination from them. And basically it was the Lewis Hamilton and Nico Rosberg show. Very entertaining, might I add, because those two really battle hard during those seasons. And definitely something that I'll talk about a bit more coming up when you talk about the 2016 year, where, again, it was an incredible year for Mercedes, despite a furious title battle between Hamilton and Rosberg. I mean, they didn't get along at that stage at all, and they were so desperate to beat the other. They basically drove into each other at the Spanish Grand Prix, which was drama. I mean, it was, people were freaking out, people were clutching out. It was very, very dramatic. And the press conferences at the end of the race was interesting, to say the least. I mean, the regulations remained very consistent over the 3 years. So when I speak about the 3 years, I mean 2014, 2016, with the restrictions on how quickly one can develop the engine still hampering the other teams' catching up efforts. So, at the same time with all, while all of these new complex engines were introduced in 2014, there was also a massive drive to cut costs and cut development costs and just overall spending in F1 that sort of spiraled out of control in the years preceding this regulation change. So the consequence of this was that the teams had very limited scope to actually develop the engine and upgrade the engine, where they had this strange token system, and I'm not going to get into it now, but basically what it came down to is teams couldn't really develop the engine as quickly as they would have wanted, and that also then obviously meant that Mercedes was able to maintain this massive advantage because, they were still able to develop their engine at a consistent pace, but the other teams were also able to then develop their engine at the same pace and not actually catch up in the way that they would have liked. So In summary then, in 2016, Mercedes won an incredible 19 out of the 21 races, with them crashing from the lead in Spain, as I've mentioned before, and Hamilton having to retire from the lead in Malaysia with a reliability problem. So if it wasn't for driver error or reliability, Mercedes would have probably won all 21 of the races in that season. But Nico Rosberg won his only championship in 2016 with an extremely dramatic Abu Dhabi Grand Prix right at the end, where Hamilton was basically blocking Nico Rosberg from overtaking and trying to push him back into the clutches of Sebastian Vettel's Ferrari. Super interesting and spicy race to go and watch, so I urge you to please go and do that if you have some time. But yeah, Rosberg won his championship and then promptly retired 5 days later. That then led into 2017, and lo and behold, rejoice, everybody was so excited. There was a big regulation change again in terms of the aerodynamic, where the cars were much longer and much wider, much more pointy, with incredible aero designed to be much faster, but with the same engines to be used at least. And Mercedes, despite the large change in the aero regulations, they were still able to be the team to beat, albeit with, I guess, more competition from Ferrari. Mercedes won 12 out of the 20 races, which is, I guess, a much lower amount than the previous years, but they still won the championship with Hamilton over Vettel at Ferrari. And they were also the first team in recent memory to win a world championship directly after such a major regulation change, which I guess is a very impressive feat in itself. And I guess we can also then mention that obviously Nico Rosberg retired and was then replaced by Valtteri Bottas for the 2017 season. But to be honest, it didn't really pose that big of a challenge for Hamilton in that first season at all. In 2018, super tightly contested battle between Mercedes and Ferrari, with many considering Ferrari to actually be the faster car during first half of the year and for parts of the second half of the year, and I think this is the most important thing, with a better engine. So Ferrari actually had the better engine and probably the more powerful engine for big chunks of that year. And that was the first time since the hybrid era dawned that Mercedes did not have the most powerful engine on the grid. But Mercedes did outdevelop Ferrari over the course of the year, and they were able to win their 5th double championship with Lewis Hamilton. They won 11 out of the 21 races, which is their lowest percentage across the season ever since, they started on this incredible dominating streak. And then lastly, 2019, the current Formula One season. And, if you followed my podcast this year, you all know how this went. All of us thought Ferrari was going to be the fastest in testing, and they were the fastest in testing. And then Mercedes just pitched up in Australia, and they've now taken 5-1-2s to start the season, a Formula One record, and they've won the following 2 races with Hamilton as well. So they've won all of the 7 races contested up until now, with many thinking, and me as well, obviously, that they will comfortably win the 2019 championship again with either Lewis Hamilton or Valtteri Bottas, although it's probably looking more likely to be Hamilton at this stage. If they do end up winning the championship double this year as well, it will mean that they will break the record for most consecutive double championships, which are currently tied with Ferrari and Michael Schumacher. If you go listen to episode 1 or part 1 of this series, then you'll hear all about that. So yeah, what an incredible period of racing for Mercedes. I think I'm trying to think of another era or another team that have dominated in the way that Mercedes has. You can maybe think about McLaren in 1988, but that's only one season where they were this dominant, and Mercedes has now been able to maintain this incredible advantage for 5 and a bit years, which is phenomenal to say the least. And I guess that begs the question, why are they so dominant? And you'll again see some key items arising in this list that I'm going to discuss now, that I mentioned in the previous 2 episodes in this series as well. But I do think there are 1 or 2 additional factors that we can mention that maybe or probably wasn't the case with the previous teams. So I think firstly, the main reason that they are so dominant, and that they've now been dominant across 2 regulation changes is that they just have this incredible capacity of knowledge and of expertise and of skill. I mean, the fact that they are so good at the moment that doesn't matter what the FIA or what regulations are thrown at them, they're backing themselves to probably come up with the best solution and to be, capable of actually, even if they're not the fastest right at the beginning, they are capable of developing the car at such a rate that, come crunch time, they're probably going to have the best package anyways. And this is, of course, a big consequence of having an incredible amount of money and just having the absolute just this large amounts of capital from obviously Mercedes and from their sponsors to be able to develop at this rate and to be able to hire the best people and to be able to, have the best drivers. And I think all of this is then flows into the fact that they were able to build this team from the ground up, and that this team has remained largely the same, since the beginning formative years in 2010, 11, and 12, with Paddy Lowe swapped with James Allison recently, the chief technical officer. But this is a team that is incredibly stable in its makeup and in its operation, and I think that plays a very, very big part in its ability to be able to keep up this incredible run. I think we definitely need to give a shout out to Toto Wolff, who is an incredible team principal, and a team principal, again, that's very willing to learn from the mistakes that he made earlier on and to then make sure that those mistakes are not made again, which is why Mercedes just keeps getting stronger and stronger and stronger. Where in 2014, they had the best car by far, but made few mistakes that led to them not winning necessarily all of the races, where, especially in 2018 last year and this year, they didn't always have the fast car. I mean, this year Ferrari was the quicker car in Bahrain, in Azerbaijan, and in Canada. But the operational excellence and Mercedes' just all-round capability to not make a mistake was what led them to still win those races, even if they weren't the fastest car on the grid that day. So, and that's all, I think, down to Toto Wolff and his ability to really galvanize the team and to extract excellence from all of the different areas and departments that the team operates in. Then I think we can definitely say that the team does have incredible drivers. Obviously, Lewis Hamilton sort of being the linchpin over the period that they've dominated. And I mean, Nico Rosberg in his own right is an excellent driver as well. And he did show that when he beat Hamilton in 2016. And then Hamilton and Bottas this year and the last 3 years, Bottas is again a very, very quick driver, a very, very consistent driver, which I guess and is something that Mercedes very likes a lot. And obviously Hamilton is operating at the peak of his powers at the moment, extremely consistent, almost never makes a mistake, and is as fast as ever. So, I mean, having two such capable drivers in their car is always going to help them a lot when it comes to winning races, and especially in Hamilton's case, winning races that they weren't necessarily supposed to win. I mean, if you think back to Monza in 2018, Monza last year, or Germany last year, where Ferrari was the out-and-out dominant car, and Hamilton was able to pull out that victory without any of us expecting it and bag those valuable points for Mercedes. So definitely something that we need to applaud. And I think lastly, and I've sort of touched on this a bit earlier, is just Mercedes' ability to develop and improve their car even when they're behind and even when they're under pressure. And I think last season in 2018 was the best example of this, where Mercedes were behind. They were definitely, Sebastian Vettel and Ferrari were beating them fair and square at almost every race for the first half of last year. And Mercedes, they were under pressure and they went away and, they developed that car. They identified the problem areas and they came with solutions. And, by the second half of the season, after the Belgian Grand Prix, Singapore Grand Prix, Mercedes was right up there with Ferrari. And a strong Mercedes and an extremely strong Lewis Hamilton was basically what was able to win them that championship at the end, even after they were behind initially. So, given everything that I've mentioned above, I guess we need to talk about, where to from here. There is a major regulation change coming up in 2021, and at this point, none of us actually know. None of us know what it's going to look like. We don't know what the rules are going to be. So, can that potentially stop this run that Mercedes is on? Because, if you look at the current regulations, Mercedes is, fair and square beating the pack. Is 2021 going to lead to Mercedes' downfall? To be honest, I don't necessarily think so, mainly because, as I mentioned, they have this incredibly efficient and effective team that now know how to deal with changes in regulations and how to extract the best from their car. So they're probably going to do the better job, regardless. And to be honest and to be frank, sort of resetting the regulations like that, all that you're going to do is you're going to cause a bigger gap. Because again, the team that has the most money and the team that is probably going to do the best job is going to be ahead again. And then the teams with less resources are going to have to start from scratch. And then, basically wipe out all of the development and all of the catching up that they were able to do, and then go and rebuild a car, and now then again start the catching up process. And I think Toto Wolff has alluded to this, where he said that, changing the regulations is probably not going to solve the issue of one team dominating everybody else, and is probably going to lead to, even more segregation. Where if you keep the regulations intact for a number of seasons, as we've seen, sort of from 2017 up to now, you can see, Ferrari getting closer and closer and closer as the years progress, with obviously, the further ahead you are, the more marginal your gains are going to be. So it's an interesting point and an interesting topic, I think, to think about. But yeah, is the 2021 regulation change, or is that going to stop Mercedes? I don't necessarily think so. A second thing that could potentially lead to their downfall is obviously if there's a large departure of top management or key staff, or if their drivers decide, listen, they're tired. Someone like Lewis Hamilton, who's so entrenched in that team now, if he had to leave, it'll be, I think, difficult for Mercedes to get his replacement and to immediately be 100% comfortable with the position that they're in. And then the same holds for, staff like Toto Wolff, if he were to leave, James Allison, the technical director, if he was to leave, Andy Cowell from the engine side, if he were to leave, it could lead to difficulties and operational issues that Mercedes hadn't had to deal with, in years. And then obviously the question is, can they be stopped? Now, and I think here, let's take a bit of a segue into a few allegations, if we can call it that, that has arisen from Mr. Helmut Marko. So now, for those who don't know, Helmut Marko is in charge of Red Bull's young driver development program, and is also one of sort of the top honchos when it comes to Red Bull Racing's team. And he basically alleged that the tire regulations the tires that changed from last year to this year, slightly thinner tread, more difficult, to wear out and to blister, that those tire regulations were basically brought in to further Mercedes' advantage, and that it basically led to them being so dominant in the way that they are this year, and that all of the other teams are now struggling, and Mercedes is the only one happy, and that the FIA basically changed the rules to suit Mercedes. And I just feel that this is the biggest load of nonsense that I've heard in a very, very long time. And to be frank, if you look at the things that he said in the past, Helmut Marko is basically Formula One's equivalent of fake news. Because I just like to address this fact and just address the allegation that say that when they were, thinking of introducing these tires last year, so they ran the new 2019 tires in a few races in 2018, in Barcelona and in Silverstone and a few other races as well. No other team had an issue with these tires. Literally no team ever said, you know what, actually, no, I don't like the new tires. Let's keep the tires as they are. Because at that stage, the complaints of the week or the complaint of the month was that no, the tires blister too easily, and drivers would like tires that they can drive harder for longer without the tires wearing off too quickly. Pirelli went and addressed these concerns and then came up with these new tires that the teams were able to test at the select few races last year. Not one team raised a complaint to Pirelli, and Pirelli actually came out and said this, where they said that not one team actually raised an issue with these new tires, and that only now after they realized that, oh, look, the tires are actually working not in the way that they expected, or, they just didn't do a good enough job to actually address the changes in the tires. Now they're upset because Mercedes was actually able to find a way to work with these tires, or whether it's by luck or pure coincidence, or whether it's by design, but the Mercedes car is still, working really well with the tires. And all of the other teams are struggling, which again is not necessarily the case, because Mercedes has also struggled with tyre warm-up this year. If you think about Hamilton in Monaco and in a few other places, and Ferrari has obviously been the big victim of this tyre change, where they have some tyre warm-up issues, and Haas as well. But Red Bull has not had such severe tyre warm-up issues, and Helmut Marko is just being sour and is being petty. And I think Red Bull needs to go back and just do a better job, to be honest. And Helmut Marko needs to be cancelled or something, because he is extremely annoying with just half-truths and random things that he throws into the press. And then everybody gets upset, and then 2 weeks after that, he sort of backtracks and said, oh, no, but, it's taken out of context or whatever it might be. Yeah, sorry for that, sort of rant. And I guess I digressed a bit, but just had to get that off my chest. And anyways, there you go, Formula One friends. That's my take on what's currently happening with Mercedes in the turbo hybrid era. And I guess what we can take away from this whole three-part series is that there's always, and there's probably always going to be, a team that is going to do a better job than the rest, with a few outlier periods where a team is absolutely dominant, as we've seen here. Now, should the structure of Formula One change to sort of address this? Should the structure change to remove the power that the teams have over the outcome? Should it become a pure drivers' championship and not a constructors as well? Let me know what you think in the comments, and I'll select a few if you do comment, and I'll address those in the next episode. Thanks for listening, and if you enjoyed the episode, please leave a rating, a comment, or subscribe to ensure that you catch all of the future content to come. I'm also on Twitter, where my handle is @TF1 Show, on Instagram, where my handle is @the TF1 Show, and on Facebook. As always, it's an absolute pleasure to chat to you all. I'll see you at the French Grand Prix. Bye.